based on a true story. Set inside a prison in Barcelona in 1976, the story begins with the arrival of a new inmate named Manuel. On his very first day, he is introduced to a young prisoner named Ruby, who is in tears and asks him for a cigarette. Before Ruby can even finish smoking, a guard suddenly shows up, scolds him, and drags him away. Before being taken to his cell, Manuel and the other new arrivals are thoroughly searched to make sure they are not hiding anything. Afterward, each prisoner is given a bucket of water that can only be filled once a day. The water is not meant for bathing, only for drinking. A few days later, Manuel is becoming increasingly uncomfortable because he has not been allowed to bathe. His body is covered in unbearable itching, so he approaches a guard and asks for permission to wash himself. However, the guard explains that all new prisoners are forbidden from bathing for their first 2 weeks, and this was Manuel's new reality. Welcome to Prison 77. After failing to get water for a bath, Manuel is approached by another inmate named Blackie, who is responsible for distributing food throughout the cell block. Feeling sorry for him, Blackie secretly slips him a few cigarettes to help ease the stress of his first days behind bars. The next day, the itching becomes too much for Manuel to handle. Frustrated and desperate, he loses his temper and demands a chance to bathe. Instead of helping him, the guards brutally beat him. Fortunately, Blackie is always there to lift his spirits. By sharing a couple of cigarettes, he manages to bring Manuel a small sense of comfort during an otherwise miserable time. After 2 weeks pass, Manuel is finally transferred to a more livable section of the prison. There he reunites with Blackie, who immediately brings him to their cell. Inside, Manuel meets another inmate named Pino, a respected veteran prisoner. From the very beginning, Pino makes it clear that Manuel should avoid causing trouble and stay calm if he wants to survive life inside the prison. A few days later, visiting day finally arrives. It is then revealed that Manuel no longer has any family left. The only person who still cares about him is his girlfriend, Lucia. After catching up and exchanging news, Lucia asks how long he will have to remain in prison. Unfortunately, Manuel cannot answer. He still has not been given his official sentence. Not long after that, while Manuel was relaxing in the prison yard, a group of inmates suddenly approached him and stole all of his clothes. Furious, he reported the incident to the chief guard. Unfortunately, his complaint was completely ignored because he did not have enough money to bribe his way into getting help. As Manuel sat there frustrated, another inmate named Andres approached him. Feeling sorry for his situation, Andres took him to his cell and gave him a set of clothes to wear. While there, Manuel also met an inmate named Bonnie. Unlike most prisoners, Bonnie was actually a doctor. After noticing Manuel's condition, he kindly treated several injuries inside his mouth. Later, Blackie took Manuel outside to get some fresh air and introduced him to Agustin, the head of the prison workshop. Blackie explained that if Manuel ever needed work, Agustin was the person to see. Blackie also told him about another prisoner named Marbella. He was the leader of the inmates housed in the special block for violent offenders. Manuel immediately noticed that Marbella was wearing the very same jacket that had been stolen from him earlier. According to Blackie, Marbella had accumulated a considerable amount of money from his criminal activities and had managed to maintain his influence even from inside prison. That afternoon, unrest broke out among the inmates in Manuel's block. The prisoners were demanding amnesty and reductions to their sentences. However, Pino and Blackie could only laugh at the protest because they were convinced it would lead nowhere. The following day, Bonnie called Manuel back for another examination. This time, however, the checkup was only a cover. Bonnie secretly handed him a stack of blank papers and instructed him to write the word amnesty on every sheet. To make it appear as though many different prisoners had written them, Manuel was told to use his left hand so the handwriting would look inconsistent and difficult to identify. One day, everything changed. The prison guards suddenly took Blackie away after a hole was discovered in the kitchen area. Based on that evidence alone, they accused him and several others of planning an escape. Not long afterward, the chief guard announced that Blackie had died from a heart attack during questioning. Pino immediately knew it was a lie. Before long, inmates throughout the prison began shouting the truth. Blackie had not died from a heart attack. He had been beaten to death by the guards. The news devastated Manuel. In anger, he threw away every amnesty paper he had spent days writing. His reaction only earned him another brutal beating at the hands of the guards. However, Manuel's actions soon attracted unexpected attention. A lawyer named Arnau came to meet him. Unlike most people on the outside, Arnau genuinely wanted to help the prisoners. He had chosen to fight for their rights and was willing to do so without charging them a single cent. After hearing Arnau's promise, Manuel finally found a glimmer of hope to hold on to. Day after day, that hope kept him going. Lucia also continued supporting him from the outside, regularly sending letters filled with encouragement, prayers, and updates from everyday life. As time passed, however, the prison's dark reality became impossible to ignore. Night after night, guards would randomly take prisoners away, even when they had done nothing wrong. One evening, the inmate they came for was Agustin, the head of the workshop. The prisoners immediately responded with an act of solidarity. One by one, they cut their own hands while chanting for amnesty, hoping to pressure the guards into backing down. In response, Bonnie demanded that journalists, doctors, and members of the press be brought in to investigate what was happening. The chief guard refused, but the situation was already attracting attention. As the injured prisoners received treatment, reporters began arriving at the prison. Bonnie and Manuel seized the opportunity to share their experiences, and their testimonies were eventually broadcast across radio stations throughout the country. The next day, Pino, Manuel, and Bonnie visited the special cell block to meet Marbella. There they discovered that Ruby had become one of Marbella's followers. Pino urged Marbella to join the growing movement for amnesty. At first, Marbella refused. He had built a comfortable position for himself inside the prison and had no interest in risking it all. But after listening to Pino's heartfelt appeal, he finally agreed to support the cause. Not long after their meeting, guards stormed the cells belonging to Pino and Manuel. Every possession they had accumulated was confiscated without explanation. To make matters worse, the chief guard ordered his men to burn everything. The following morning, a prisoner suddenly appeared to suffer a violent seizure, but it was all part of a plan. The act allowed him to overpower a guard and take him hostage. The moment that happened, the rest of the prisoners rose up as well, no longer caring about the consequences. Together, they pushed their way onto the prison rooftop. The situation quickly spiraled into chaos, but their goal remained the same. They wanted their demand for amnesty to be heard. This dramatic protest soon captured the attention of the entire city. Public support for the prisoners began growing stronger with each passing day. Following the uprising, Arnau hurried to arrange for several inmates to participate in an upcoming court hearing. Both Bonnie and Manuel immediately volunteered. Unfortunately, their hopes were crushed when one prisoner uncovered a shocking truth. The judge assigned to oversee the hearing was actually a prison officer operating under a false identity. The deception became obvious almost immediately. But Manuel received the worst treatment of all. Because the authorities viewed him as one of the main organizers behind the movement, he was subjected to especially brutal torture. After spending days locked away in solitary confinement, Bonnie and Manuel were finally released from their cells. However, Bonnie was immediately taken somewhere else by the guards, and it was clear that nothing good awaited him there. Meanwhile, Manuel was summoned by the prison director and forced to sign paperwork agreeing to a transfer to another prison. He was given only until the next day to make his decision. When he returned to his cell, Manuel found himself overwhelmed with emotion after hearing Pino share the painful story of his life. Pino had grown up without parents and spent his childhood in an orphanage. As an adult, he was eventually imprisoned simply for criticizing government policies. What made his story even more heartbreaking was the fact that he had already spent 30 years behind bars. Throughout most of his life, he had known very little happiness. More than anything, he dreamed of one day being free and getting married like any ordinary person. The following morning, Manuel woke up to find Pino waiting for him with food and several books. Pino explained that they were gifts from the other inmates, who wanted to thank Manuel for his courage in standing up and fighting for amnesty. But Manuel still had not made a decision regarding the transfer. As a result, both he and Pino were forcibly taken away, loaded into a vehicle, and transferred to a special prison where they could no longer influence the inmates from their previous facility. The moment Manuel arrived at the new prison, the abuse began. Afterward, Manuel was thrown into a dark isolation cell. There, he was forced to stand facing a wall with his arms held rigidly in position. If a guard arrived and found him in any other posture, he would be beaten again without mercy. Desperate to escape the constant abuse, Manuel came up with a dangerous plan. He deliberately swallowed a bolt so that he would become seriously ill and be taken to the prison infirmary. Once he finally saw a doctor, Manuel immediately asked him to help Pino as well, since his friend was still being held in solitary confinement. When the doctor saw the condition of both men, he questioned the guards about the severe injuries covering their bodies. The guards quickly lied, claiming that Manuel and Pino were extremely dangerous prisoners who required harsh treatment. Unfortunately, Manuel's desperate stunt came at a cost. Because he had swallowed the bolt, he was forced to undergo surgery. As a result, he and Pino were separated, uncertain of when they would see each other again. After recovering from surgery, Manuel was returned to the prison, where he was immediately reunited with Pino, who was now in much better condition. Pino revealed some encouraging news. The prison doctor had secretly informed Arnau and his team of lawyers about what had happened to them and where they were being held. Because of that, the guards no longer dared to openly torture them. Throughout this difficult period, Lucia continued sending Manuel letters filled with encouragement, giving him the strength to endure another day behind bars. A few days later, one of Arnau's associates named Carlos arrived at the prison. Thanks to his efforts, Manuel and Pino were eventually transferred back to their original prison. Their return was met with a warm welcome. Marbella and the other inmates greeted them like heroes who had finally come home. Several months passed, and both Manuel and Pino became highly respected among the prisoners because of everything they had endured and sacrificed. Around the same time, newspapers began reporting that Arnau and several community groups were preparing another push for amnesty. For the inmates, it was the first real sign of hope they had seen in a long time. One day, Manuel went to meet with Marbella to discuss the latest developments regarding the amnesty campaign. But without warning, Ruby suddenly appeared and stabbed Marbella from behind. No one seemed to understand why he had done it. A few days later, another devastating blow arrived. The prisoners learned that the court had officially rejected their request for amnesty. The news crushed everyone's spirits. Unable to control his frustration, Manuel lashed out at one of the guards. As punishment, he was immediately thrown back into solitary confinement. After serving his time, Pino brought him back to his cell. Once Manuel had recovered, Pino finally shared a secret plan he had been keeping for a long time. At the far end of the prison stood an abandoned elevator shaft. Through a narrow opening, they could observe everything happening in the prison yard below. Beneath the elevator area was a drainage pipe that eventually led outside the prison walls and toward the street. The only problem was that reaching it would require digging a tunnel. Manuel quickly recruited several trusted inmates to join the escape plan. To hide the sound of digging, he even instructed one prisoner to play soccer nearby, helping mask the noise from the tunnel construction. With everything in place, the escape operation quietly began. Several days into the digging, Ruby unexpectedly showed up and asked to join them. After 3 exhausting weeks of work, the group finally broke through and found a route that connected directly to the drainage system they had been searching for. The next day, Manuel and Pino prepared for their escape. Before they left, Pino handed Manuel a shirt and told him to wear it once they reached the outside world. When the guards were distracted during a break, the prisoners put their plan into motion and managed to capture one of the officers on duty. Before crawling out through the tunnel, Manuel and Pino changed into different clothes to avoid attracting attention once they emerged. Not everyone was as fortunate. Several escapees were eventually recaptured, but Manuel and Pino managed to get away and quickly boarded a bus. After getting off, the two friends realized their journey together had come to an end. They were forced to part ways and go in different directions. As Pino walked away, Manuel discovered something hidden inside the shirt he had been given. Tucked inside the pocket was a sum of money that Pino had secretly left for him, making sure he would have enough to survive while on the run. Without wasting any time, Manuel set out to find Lucia so they could finally begin their life together again. Before the film ends, a final note reveals that 175 prisoners successfully escaped during the historic breakout. Those who managed to get away were eventually granted their freedom and were never arrested again. A few months later, amnesty was finally granted to the remaining prisoners as well. After years of suffering, sacrifice, and struggle, justice was finally served, bringing the remarkable true story to a close. So the moral of the story is, if your prison escape plan takes less effort than swallowing a bolt and digging a tunnel for 3 weeks, you're probably not trying hard enough.